Alex stared at his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact list, debating whether to call Kate. His acquaintance's words echoed in his mind, the casual remark that shattered his trust. Kate's really the life of those corporate parties at Visionary Studio, huh? He knew these parties existed, but Kate had always described them as dry, employees-only networking events. Yet the way his acquaintance had described her, the dazzling center of attention, sipping wine with an effortless smile, didn't align with the image she had painted. His heart sank further when he recalled her increasing late nights, the way she'd recently started putting more effort into her makeup before leaving, and her sudden disinterest in their usual evening chats. The first blow came when Alex decided to probe further, calling another contact who worked at the same agency. "Oh, those parties? They're anything but boring," the colleague laughed, unaware of Alex's growing distress. "Kate's the star. Everyone loves her there." Alex hung up, his stomach in knots. For the first time, he felt an unfamiliar tension gripping his marriage. That evening, he tried to act normal when Kate returned home. She greeted him with her usual smile, but something in her demeanor felt rehearsed, like she was wearing a mask. "How was work?" he asked, attempting to sound casual. "Exhausting," she replied, brushing past him to the bathroom. Her response lacked her usual warmth. When she emerged later, she mumbled something about needing to check emails and retreated to their shared office. Alex noticed her phone, casually left on the kitchen counter. His hands trembled as he picked it up. He wasn't proud of what he was about to do, but his doubts overwhelmed him. Unlocking the phone, his heart raced as he navigated to her messages. The inbox seemed ordinary at first, filled with messages from coworkers and mundane family updates. But one thread caught his eye, a string of emojis and casual banter with a contact saved under Melissa. Scrolling through, Alex's blood ran cold. Melissa wasn't a Melissa at all. The tone was far too flirtatious, the inside jokes too personal. One particular message read, "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to do it again. Just us this time." Kate's behavior suddenly made sense. The late nights, the extra effort in her appearance, the corporate parties she insisted were routine. She wasn't just attending, she was thriving in a world Alex didn't belong to. Over the next few days, Alex spiraled. He couldn't focus at work, and every glance at Kate felt like a dagger to his chest. He decided to confront her indirectly, asking casual questions about her work, her colleagues, the parties. Her answers were clipped and evasive, her body language defensive. It was as if she sensed his probing and resented it. One evening, Alex planned to follow her. She had mentioned another team dinner, and he wanted to see for himself. Dressed inconspicuously, he parked a block away from the restaurant she mentioned and waited. Sure enough, Kate arrived, but not alone. A man exited her car, someone Alex didn't recognize. Their interaction was casual but intimate. His hand on the small of her back, her laughter ringing out as they walked inside. The dinner lasted hours, but Alex didn't move. He watched them through the window, their lively conversation punctuated by shared smiles and leaning in too close. When they finally left, Alex stayed rooted in his seat, his world collapsing around him. Back at home, Kate arrived late, brushing off his questions with excuses about work running overtime. He could see through the facade now, but confronting her outright felt like leaping off a cliff with no safety net. Instead, he started gathering evidence, checking her messages when she was asleep, and noting the inconsistencies in her stories. One night, he discovered photos on her laptop. They weren't explicit but undeniably damning. Candid shots of her and the same man, arms draped around each other, their smiles too intimate for colleagues. Some were taken at the agency's events, others were in settings he didn't recognize. Kate's distance grew palpable. She no longer kissed him goodnight or laughed at his jokes. Alex's heartbreak turned to humiliation as he realized how little effort she put into hiding her actions. He felt like an outsider in his own home, watching the woman he loved slip away, piece by piece. The breaking point came during a family dinner. Alex had been invited to Kate's office holiday party, but she made an excuse, claiming it was small and exclusive. Yet, at dinner, one of her coworkers innocently brought up how great it was that the spouses had been invited this year. Alex barely managed to mask his anger, the pieces falling together too clearly now. His gaze lingered on Kate across the table. She was laughing with her family, her usual charm on full display. He couldn't reconcile the woman he knew with the stranger she was becoming. The unease that had gripped Alex since his first suspicions about Kate had grown into a gnawing anxiety that invaded every corner of his mind. He couldn't shake the image of the unfamiliar man at the restaurant, the flirtatious messages he had uncovered, or the evasive answers Kate gave when questioned. Yet, what came next tipped the scales entirely, plunging Alex into a humiliating spiral of discovery. One evening, while Kate was in the shower, Alex paced their bedroom, trying to calm his thoughts. He wasn't sure if it was paranoia or a gut instinct, but he found himself drawn to her dressing table. Among her neatly arranged perfumes, jewelry, and cosmetics, something stood out: a tube of lipstick. Its vivid red color was striking, far removed from the soft pinks and neutrals she typically wore. His hands trembled as he picked it up, examining the label. It was unopened, yet he had a sinking feeling. She had never mentioned buying this shade, and he hadn't seen her wear anything like it. Alex placed the lipstick back, his mind racing. His chest felt tight, his breath shallow as he tried to convince himself that it was nothing. But his efforts to suppress his suspicions only made the tension worse. Days later, as he carried laundry into the guest bedroom, he noticed something even more troubling. Draped over the back of the chair was a bracelet, delicate, silver, and adorned with small charms. Alex frowned. He was certain it didn't belong to Kate. The design wasn't her style, and he couldn't recall ever seeing her wear it. It looked out of place, as though someone had left it behind in a hurry. His stomach churned as he replayed the scenario in his head, imagining Kate with someone else in the very room he stood in now. He picked up the bracelet, its cold metal pressing into his palm as the realization dawned. Someone else had been here, recently. He examined the room more closely, noticing subtle signs he had missed before: the faint scent of unfamiliar cologne lingering in the air and a barely perceptible dent in the pillow that hadn't been there the last time he'd been in the room. The bed had been hastily remade, the sheets slightly askew. Alex's knees nearly buckled as he sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of his discovery crushing him. His thoughts were loud and chaotic, swirling with questions he wasn't ready to face. Who had been here? How often? Was Kate brazen enough to bring someone into their home, the place they had built together? He couldn't confront her, not yet. He needed more, something undeniable, irrefutable. Something that would force her to admit what she was hiding. Over the next week, he began combing through every detail of her life that he could access. He checked their shared credit card statements, hoping to find some clue. Sure enough, there were charges for dinners at restaurants he had never heard of, hotel stays in the middle of the city, and a boutique that specialized in high-end men's fashion. The final piece came in the form of an unassuming receipt he found in the trash. It was crumpled and partially torn but still legible enough to make his heart drop. It was from a florist, roses, a bouquet worth far more than what she'd ever bought for him. The date and time corresponded to an evening she had told him she was working late. Alex was seething, the humiliation searing through him as he pieced everything together. He began paying closer attention to her behavior at home, noticing the subtle changes that now felt glaring. Kate's phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter or coffee table, was now constantly by her side. She took calls in hushed tones, excusing herself to other rooms, and frequently checked her screen with a faint, secretive smile. One evening he decided to test her. When she came home, looking more polished than usual and claiming she had been at a client meeting, he casually asked, "How was it? Did you close the deal?" She hesitated, her eyes darting to the side. "It went fine," she said quickly. "Nothing exciting." Her response was devoid of any detail, her tone clipped. Alex nodded, masking his fury. He could almost see the lies weaving themselves into her words, binding them tighter. The tension between them grew unbearable. He began avoiding her, unsure of how to confront her without unraveling completely. She seemed oblivious, or perhaps she was simply pretending not to notice. The lipstick reappeared one evening, this time smeared on the rim of a wine glass she had forgotten to rinse in the sink. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through him. Alex didn't know whether he hated her more for the betrayal or for the ease with which she carried on, acting as though nothing was wrong. His nights were sleepless, his mind replaying every clue, every lie, every moment he had trusted her blindly. The guest bedroom became a monument to his humiliation. He avoided entering it whenever possible, unable to face the evidence of her betrayal. But one day, driven by an unbearable urge, he opened the closet and found another damning piece of evidence: a man's tie. It was neatly folded and tucked into the corner, as though deliberately hidden but forgotten. The tie was a brand he couldn't afford, something far out of place in their modest home. It was as if the walls were closing in on him, each discovery a fresh dagger to his already wounded pride. Alex felt trapped in a marriage that had become a mockery of the love they once shared. He had always thought of himself as observant, a man in control of his life, and yet here he was, played for a fool in his own home. That night, as Kate slept soundly beside him, Alex stared at the ceiling, his mind a storm of rage and heartbreak. He knew he couldn't live like this, caught between suspicion and the crushing weight of his discoveries. The evidence was overwhelming, and yet the thought of confrontation terrified him. He wasn't sure he could bear to hear her admit it, to see the pity or indifference in her eyes. The humiliation of knowing another man had walked through their door, touched the woman he loved, and left traces of his presence everywhere was too much to endure. Alex felt the cracks in his soul widen, his trust shattered, his pride reduced to ashes. Every moment spent in that house felt like a cruel reminder of his failure to see the truth until it was too late. Alex had thought the worst of his suspicions had been confirmed with the lipstick, the tie, and the mysterious bracelet in the guest bedroom, but nothing could prepare him for what he was about to uncover. The humiliation of finding those physical reminders of betrayal in his home lingered, but he needed undeniable proof, something he couldn't rationalize away. One night, Kate had fallen asleep on the couch, her phone loosely gripped in her hand. Alex, lying awake in their bed, listened to the rhythmic hum of the television still playing in the living room. Quietly, he slipped out of bed and approached her. The glow of her phone caught his eye, and his heart pounded as he gently eased it out of her hand. Her thumbprint was all he needed to unlock the device. He scrolled through her recent messages and saw a familiar name, Daniel. Alex's stomach dropped. He vaguely remembered Kate mentioning Daniel in passing, a photographer at her agency. The texts were casual at first, about work projects and deadlines, but as he scrolled further, the tone shifted. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. I miss you already. Can't wait to see you again." The pit in Alex's stomach grew deeper. He opened the photos. There they were, selfies of Kate and Daniel. Some were harmless, taken at work events, but others were damning. Her leaning into him, his hand resting too comfortably on her hip, their smiles too intimate to be mistaken for anything other than lovers. In one, she wore that bright red lipstick. Alex's blood boiled as he pieced it together. The late nights, the new clothes, the extra effort in her appearance. It had all been for Daniel. But it wasn't just the photos. Alex found chat logs that went beyond flirtation. They were planning dinners, discussing moments they had shared that Alex hadn't been a part of. In one exchange, Daniel texted, "You're incredible, Kate. I don't know how he doesn't see what he has." Her reply was equally gut-wrenching, "It's complicated. But with you, I feel alive again." The betrayal was no longer just a suspicion. It was real, raw, and undeniable. His hands trembled as he locked her phone and placed it back where he found it. Kate stirred but didn't wake, oblivious to the storm raging inside her husband. The following day, Alex couldn't focus at work. Every glance at his phone felt like a countdown to the moment he would confront her. But he wasn't ready yet. He needed more than texts and photos. He needed to see it with his own eyes. That evening, Kate told him she had a late meeting. Her excuse was so routine now that it barely registered as a lie. She kissed him on the cheek, grabbed her bag, and walked out the door. Alex waited for a few minutes before following. He drove carefully, keeping his headlights off whenever he got close to her car. His heart raced as she took an unexpected turn, heading toward the outskirts of the city. She eventually pulled up to an apartment complex. Alex parked a safe distance away, watching as she stepped out of the car, smoothing her dress and checking her reflection in the car window. She looked more radiant than he'd seen her in months, a painful reminder of the effort she no longer made for him. Alex watched as a man opened the door to one of the units, Daniel. He was tall, with an easy smile that made Alex's stomach churn. Kate greeted him warmly, stepping inside without hesitation. The door closed behind them, leaving Alex in his car, frozen in disbelief. He felt like an intruder in his own life, watching as everything he thought he knew about his wife unraveled in front of him. He sat there for over an hour, his mind racing with images of what was happening behind that door. The humiliation was suffocating. Not only had Kate betrayed him, but she had done so with someone she worked with, someone who likely knew about him. The thought of Daniel mocking him, of them laughing at his ignorance, made his blood boil. The entire drive home, Alex was consumed by a mix of anger and despair. He replayed every moment, every red flag he had ignored. The way Kate had grown distant, the little lies she told so effortlessly, it all pointed to this. Yet he had clung to the hope that he was wrong, that she could still be the woman he fell in love with. Now, that hope was gone, replaced by a bitter certainty. When Kate returned home later that night, she acted as though nothing had happened. She smiled at Alex, asking about his day, as though she hadn't just spent the evening in another man's arms. Alex struggled to keep his composure, his fists clenching under the table as they ate dinner in tense silence. Over the next few days, Alex's behavior became colder, more detached. Kate seemed oblivious, or perhaps she didn't care. She continued her routine, the lies piling up like bricks in a wall that separated them. Alex found himself checking her phone whenever he had the chance, each discovery adding another layer to his humiliation. He learned their affair had been going on for months, with secret getaways disguised as business trips and late-night rendezvous at Daniel's apartment. The texts grew bolder, more explicit. Daniel would write things like, "Can't wait to see you tonight. I've got something special planned." Kate's replies were equally painful. "I need you. I hate how much I miss you when we're apart." The final straw came when Alex stumbled upon a calendar entry in her phone, marked with a heart. It was for an upcoming weekend. She had told him she'd be at a work retreat, but the location was Daniel's cabin. The humiliation was complete. Alex felt like a man who had been gutted, his insides exposed for the world to see. He had no doubt now, Kate was cheating on him, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Alex had reached his limit. Watching Kate slip further into her double life had drained him of every ounce of patience and affection. The love he once felt for her had curdled into something bitter, an unrecognizable mixture of anger and disgust. It was no longer about salvaging their relationship. It was about reclaiming his dignity. That morning, while Kate was in the shower, Alex made his first move. He had already consulted a divorce lawyer a few days prior, bringing evidence of her infidelity. The lawyer assured him that with the photos, texts, and timeline Alex had compiled, his case was solid. Kate's betrayal was not just emotional, it was financial too. She had used their shared funds to indulge in her affair, a detail that would tip the scales in Alex's favor. By the time Kate emerged from the bathroom, Alex had already finalized his decision. She greeted him with the same disingenuous smile she had worn for months, and it took all his willpower not to confront her right then. Instead, he played along, masking his contempt as he waited for the right moment. Later that week, Alex initiated the divorce proceedings. The papers arrived while Kate was at work, and he left them on the kitchen counter, neatly placed on top of her unopened mail. When she returned that evening, Alex sat in the living room, waiting. He didn't greet her as she walked through the door, her expression quickly turning to confusion when she saw the stack of documents. "What's this?" she asked, picking up the papers. "You know exactly what it is," Alex replied, his voice cold. "I'm done, Kate. I'm done with the lies, the late nights, and the man you think I don't know about. Daniel, right?" Kate's face went pale. For a moment, she opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. She set the papers down with trembling hands. "Alex, Don't bother denying it," he interrupted, standing to face her. "I've seen the texts. I've seen the photos. I followed you to his apartment, Kate." I know everything. The humiliation that crossed her face was almost satisfying. Her carefully constructed facade crumbled in an instant, leaving her exposed. I didn't mean. You didn't mean for me to find out, Alex snapped, cutting her off again. That's all you're sorry for. Kate's eyes filled with tears, but Alex felt nothing. Her emotions felt as staged as her excuses. Can we at least talk about this? She pleaded, her voice shaking. There's nothing to talk about, he said firmly. I've already filed. The house stays with me, and I've frozen our joint accounts. You'll need to figure out where you're staying because you're not welcome here anymore. Kate's tears turned to anger. You can't just throw me out, Alex. This is my home too. Not anymore, he said coolly. You gave that up when you brought your affair into this house. For the next few days, Kate's attempts to reason with Alex were relentless. She begged, she cried, and finally she lashed out, accusing him of being distant and blaming him for pushing her into Daniel's arms. But Alex wasn't moved. Her words only reinforced his decision to end their marriage. The final blow came when Alex reported Kate and Daniel's relationship to their HR department at Visionary Studio. He knew their agency had a strict no fraternization policy, especially between employees in the same department. Armed with the incriminating texts and photos, Alex filed a formal complaint. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within a week, Daniel was called into a meeting with HR and promptly fired. Kate was reprimanded but allowed to keep her job, albeit with a warning that another violation would result in immediate termination. The news spread quickly through the office, and the scandal became the talk of Visionary Studio. Kate's humiliation deepened as she realized how thoroughly her affair had unraveled her life. Colleagues whispered behind her back, her professional reputation tarnished. Meanwhile, Daniel disappeared entirely, unable to face the fallout of his actions. Alex took no pleasure in her downfall, at least, that's what he told himself. But deep down, there was a grim satisfaction in watching Kate reap the consequences of her choices. She had not only betrayed him but underestimated his resolve. As he packed the last of her belongings into boxes and set them by the front door, Alex felt a strange sense of closure. Kate came by to collect her things, her expression a mix of defiance and regret. She didn't say much, and neither did Alex. There was nothing left to say. When she finally drove away, Alex stood in the doorway of the house they had once shared, staring out at the empty street. The pain of her betrayal still lingered, but for the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe again. The house was his, the finances were secured, and Kate's duplicity had been exposed for all to see. The revenge wasn't just in the divorce or the HR complaint. It was in reclaiming his life, his pride, and his future. Alex knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least now, it was his alone. Daniel's termination from Visionary Studio sent shockwaves through the agency. His sudden firing for violating company policies wasn't just about the affair. HR uncovered far more than Alex had anticipated. The formal complaint had triggered an internal audit, during which it was discovered that Daniel had been misusing company photography equipment for personal gain. He had rented the high-end gear out to third parties, pocketing the money, and using the studio's name to lend credibility to the transactions. The situation escalated quickly. Visionary Studio's legal team pressed charges, and Daniel was arrested within weeks. His fall from grace was spectacular. The news spread not only through the agency but also throughout the local photography community. Daniel had once been admired for his talent, but his reputation now lay in tatters. His social media accounts were inundated with comments mocking his recklessness, and professional connections severed ties with him. No one wanted to associate with a man who had burned bridges so spectacularly. For Kate, the fallout was equally devastating. While she avoided termination, her standing at Visionary Studio was irreparably damaged. Colleagues she had once considered friends avoided her in the halls, and the whispers followed her wherever she went. Her name became synonymous with scandal, and she was passed over for projects and promotions. The bright, confident art director who had once been the center of attention was now a pariah. Kate tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, but her personal life continued to crumble. With no home to return to, she moved in with her sister, who reluctantly offered her a spare room. The arrangement was far from ideal. Kate's sister, while sympathetic at first, grew tired of the constant tension Kate brought into the household. Her once close bond with her family began to fray under the weight of her mistakes. Her relationship with her children suffered most of all. Alex had been granted primary custody during the divorce proceedings, and the children, already hurt and confused by the unraveling of their parents' marriage, grew distant from Kate. Visits became infrequent, strained by their resentment and her inability to reconcile her actions with the pain she had caused. They refused her attempts to explain, seeing them as hollow justifications rather than heartfelt apologies. Kate's life devolved into a series of humiliations. Her sister's home offered little privacy, and her lack of financial independence meant she relied heavily on her sister's goodwill. The vibrant, ambitious woman she had once been was now a shadow of herself, her days consumed by regret and the whispers of what could have been. Meanwhile, Daniel's legal troubles worsened. The stolen equipment led to a civil lawsuit, and with mounting legal fees, he struggled to stay afloat. He was forced to sell his belongings to cover the costs, moving out of his upscale apartment into a dingy studio far removed from the life he had built. His attempts to find work were met with rejection at every turn, his name tarnished by his scandalous behavior. Daniel and Kate's once secret affair became a cautionary tale in professional circles. Their former colleagues spoke of them in hushed tones, their story a grim reminder of how easily ambition and indiscretion could lead to ruin. Even those who had initially sympathized with Kate turned against her as her role in Daniel's downfall became clearer. Alex, on the other hand, began to rebuild his life. The house, now free of the memories of betrayal, became a sanctuary. His children, while still grappling with the changes, found solace in the stability he provided. Alex threw himself into his work and his role as a father, determined to move past the pain Kate had inflicted. Kate's attempts to regain her footing were met with repeated failure. The professional world that had once embraced her now shunned her, and her sister's patience wore thin as Kate failed to find steady employment. The humiliation of being dependent on others, of watching her children grow closer to Alex while drifting further from her, ate away at her confidence. In the end, Daniel and Kate were left with nothing but the ashes of their choices. Their affair, once a source of excitement and escape, had destroyed their careers, their reputations, and their lives. For Kate, the ultimate humiliation was not just the loss of her family or her job. It was the realization that her pursuit of fleeting happiness had cost her everything she once held dear.